This is a very complicated conversation, and I think I want to be careful about, again, conflating mathematical averageness with trait averageness, right? So with muscularity, we don't see this preference for average muscularity, right? So we see a preference for average facial size, shape, placement of traits, right? But with muscularity, it's more complicated. I mean,
do women like muscular men?
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's some don't, right? But there's a variety of convergent, and so I'm not saying that like all women prefer muscles, and I'm also not saying, as you noted, that as muscular as possible is optimal, right? And it's also possible that a certain degree of muscularity is sexy in some contexts, but not in all, right? Like the bodies that are popular in pornography might not actually look that great in real life, right? There's something about like the kind of super stimulus of like a super muscular lean dude, or someone who's had their body done to an extreme degree that might work on camera, but not in the real world. But in any case, muscularity. There was a recent meta-analysis that just got published on this, or I believe it just got published. It might be still in the kind of public awaiting review sphere. But certainly the results are out, and they looked at kind of all the studies on predictors of mating success in all these different ways. And it just sort of is the case, right? In the sense that regardless of what people say is attractive and what isn't, men who are muscular have higher mating success than men who aren't, right? And men who are more bodily masculine in general seem to have higher mating success. And so there's a couple different reasons why that might be. I mean, the first thought is pretty obvious. It's like maybe guys with muscles are just sexier, right? And there are individual studies where it's like you show women a bunch of bodies and you're like, who's hottest in this crew? And it's like a guy who's more muscular than average and leaner than average, right? Not stage ready bodybuilder, but certainly like pretty high standard, right? There's other studies that don't show that, but there are other ways in which muscularity can help you to compete for mates without making you more attractive. So one route by which this could be the case, there was a really interesting study, which you might have already read. I'm sure one of your guesses.
David Putz.
It might have been him. It was the frat boy study. So they studied a bunch of frat boys. I'll email this to you afterwards because you're going to like reading it. They studied a bunch of frat boys, and they had them rate each other on like who would roll who, basically, like who would be the best fighter, who's the most intimidating, that sort of question. I can't remember the scale items they used. And then they had women rate the frat boys as to
David
like
Putz.
How hot are these guys?
Yep.
And really weird result. How hot the women said the guys were it wasn't a strong predictor of the male mating success. Now, mating success is very hard to measure. They measured it by number of mates. So we'll talk about this more in a second. But at least in that study with those measurements, the intimidation factor was better, right? It was better than being hot. It was better to be scary than hot. And so one potential idea is that if you're a super jacked, scary dude and you're talking to a girl at the bar, everyone else is like, all right, that may as well be his wife. I'm not going anywhere near this situation. She's off limits. Whereas if you're a super scrawny guy who is, is frail, maybe not. That's one idea. But another idea, and this is, I think, another likely hypothesis, frankly, is that, and this goes back to the masculinity trade-off thing that we were talking about earlier, is that maybe the traits associated with accruing muscles are also the same traits associated with aggressive pursuit of short-term mating, right? And so measuring mating success with number of mates in that case, right? They didn't look at how good looking were these girls, how intelligent were these women, how high mate value in general were these women, right? They didn't look at that. It was literally just how many people have you slept with, which, say what you will, I mean, that's an indicator of something. But it might not be that much more of an indicator than you're not an incel, right? Because after that, it's like, if you're at least at the bare minimum level of attractiveness to engage in short-term mating, and that's not a particularly low level, right? That is at least medium, surely. But once you're at that level, if you want to, in a modern mating market, you could have a one night stand every week. So it's like, it might not be that great of an indicator, but it is interesting.
What about weight, BMI, body shape for women?
Well, I'll note briefly on BMI for men. It is interesting. There was a dating app data set where it indicated that the best BMI to be as a man was about 27, right? And it's just hard to know how to interpret that, because 27 could mean like, oh, that dude is jacked.